Every time we get together, I feel like you're at a new angle.
It's the same. It's the same as it's been for like the last several.
Well, I haven't been.
I think there's more shit happening in the background. It's like a constantly evolving situation. I bought these Seattle sports canvases, and a couple got printed wrong. That's why it's changed from Ken Griffey Jr. to Richard Sherman. I had a Sean Kemp and Gary Payton one back there, and that one was like super pixelated. But yeah, this is what it's going to be for a while.
Okay.
Until we start doing it in person, and then we have like we're ready to go back there.
Nice.
You know who someone offered to do it in person the other day, and I was like, oh, that's hilarious. You definitely have not listened to the podcast in a very long time.
Yeah, well, you've got the couch set up back there, so that's
yeah. We have a couch and a chair. There's two. It's not, you and I aren't sitting together on a love seat when you come back to do it in person.
Wow, that's
in 2026 when you finally make your return. We're not doing it on the love seat.
I'm glad that you're doing more of these now, because then my absence it's mitigated by the fact
that's true.
Yeah, you have so many for the people that have been listening, for the 3 or 4 of you that have been listening on the days that I'm not here. Yeah, I assume it's great. I haven't been tuning in because
sure, that's fine. You're essentially a guest on this podcast at this point, which is great.
That's exactly what I want. That's perfect. Yes.
Yeah, and I think yeah, it's nice. It's nice to have you back. It's been, I think, 3 weeks of podcasts. Because we're in our 3rd week of podcasts since you and I last talked. It's obviously we're earlier in the week, and you always miss the most important times for us to be doing podcasts. And I'm like, this is not true in any other part of my life, but it's basically I want a podcast more than you do.
Yeah, there's been a lot of injuries, illnesses, and other things in my life. I'm finally done with softball, which
gotta
quit
that shit.
I'm a grown man pushing 40, so softball is what it is. It is really, outside of golf, it's my only form of recreation, but golf doesn't do it for me. If you grew up playing competitive sports, you probably understand. Golf is a last resort. In golf, you're really just competing against yourself for the most part. But softball is a nice outlet for me to actually still be competitive and have fun, right? And this was the first year that felt like my body really betrayed me. I've had plantar fasciitis for 6 months, which sucks. It's just I basically can play a softball game, spend the entire week just healing, and then by the time I'm mostly healed, it's time to play again. So it's just been terrible. And then, as I mentioned to you the last time we were supposed to get together, I strained my oblique pretty bad, which then turned itself into this full-blown sickness that ended up with me being bedridden for a day. Just don't get old, just don't get older. That's the moral of the story.
Go the Kurt Cobain route and do not get old.
I understand why people, give up physical activity. Age.
I had a moment. So I was my daughter started playing soccer recently, and we had to work on after the first game. My daughter's not a very aggressive person, and so we had to work on I tried to warn her. I'm like, when you play soccer, the other team's allowed to take the ball from you. All the rules of life where you're not allowed to steal from someone, these are gone in sports. They're gonna take the ball from you. You need to be able to take the ball from them. First week, big culture shock. So after it, I was like, let's go. We're going to go in the yard, and I'm going to take the ball from you, and you're going to take the ball from me. Just very light, me playing soccer with a 5-year-old. And in that time, I'm wearing running shoes, which at my weight and age are not perfect soccer shoes, we'll say. And I did something to my foot. My foot is just fucked up, unexplainable fucked up. And and then this morning, these kids don't know how to walk human beings. They walk. She technically walks. The 5-year-old, she walks. She's a proficient. We don't even call her proficient at walking. But walking in a group, terrible at that. And I tripped and rolled my ankle on her this morning because she was weaving in and out. So Yeah, these kids are problems.
Yeah.
I also was sick. It's been documented on the podcast, but I got very sick also. We're a wreck, Alex, as a podcast.
It is when you have kids and you start to turn the calendar to September, October, the fall.
Yeah.
You know you're screwed.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time before you're going to get something.
I know. My kid's in kindergarten. We have like another couple hundred kids that are providing disease to our household.
Exchange germs. Yeah. On the sports topic, I do kind of hope my daughter grows up to be a little bit of a bully. I'm not going to lie.
Sure.
I wanted to be good at sports because I want like something to watch and enjoy. Right. Like I think
it's what you're saying is if she doesn't get into sports, you won't love her as much as you would if she does get into sports.
Absolutely. That's 100% what I'm saying. Yes,
I read you loud and clear. You didn't need to
go ahead and save that and we'll share it with her on like her 16th birthday. Or something.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give it to her much earlier. Actually, I'll put the recording out there.
I mean, I hear stories from parents all the time about their kids going through the phase where they're trying new hobbies and activities and they get into sports or whatever. And every parent, I mean, when your kid first starts out in sports, it sucks for every parent. Like, I'm sure there's the initial experience, which is like joy at just watching them, play and have fun. But once it starts getting real, like what you're explaining, and there's actual competition involved, the early stages of competition are miserable from a viewing perspective. It's not, it's not fun.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, I'll tell you this, she's one of two girls on the team. And it's not great for the stereotype that like every time the ball would get stolen from her, she would run off the field crying. And then the other girl on the team, I'm not going to out this girl because she's a 5-year-old that is innocent and doesn't belong. She's not my daughter, but she like similarly reacts to every part of soccer, every down of soccer. And I told my daughter, I was like, it's going to take practice. There's these kids. Some of them have been playing a lot longer than you. They're going to be better. And she's like, no, I'm good at soccer already. You don't need to tell me. And I was like, okay, but just in case you come across someone who maybe is a little bit better at soccer, you might want to like prepare yourself mentally. And she was not interested in that. And now it's like, we're getting there. Like I will say she's making big improvements, but yeah, it's you don't want to be the parent whose kid runs off crying and abandons the team. Do you know what I mean?
You got to teach your kids how to cheat at sports early.
That's right.
Because that's how you get ahead at that age. That's what parents, fans, potential recruiters. That's what they notice. They don't. They don't notice the bad kids. They only notice the ones who are establishing their dominance on the playing surface.
Well, I do want to. I'm not going to out the league that she's playing in. I will tell you it privately so that we paid a decent amount of money to be in this league. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's crazy the amount of money you pay for something that's like essentially babysitting. Like, and there's no referees. It's 2-on-2 games. There's no goals. They're just like cones. And I'm like, where is all this money going? Who is taking this money? Like the coaches are parents of kids on the team. I'm sure like field rentals aren't free, but the amount of money that this league collected for like the U6 league is like $100,000. I like mathed it out and there's like, it's like $100,000. And I'm like, where did it go?
I think it is fair when paying for youth sports leagues to get an itemized receipt for what you're paying for. Because here's the thing, playing in adult rec sports leagues, I always think we're not paying enough.
Yeah.
Like I'm on a team of softball, for example. We're renting like pretty decent fields. We're getting umpires to come out. The league is providing like balls and stuff like that.
Sure.
And obviously the facilities that are all equipped and cleaned up beforehand. And I'm paying like, I don't know, once we divide it up amongst the team, I'm paying like maybe $60 to $100 for my share of an
Damn, that's free basically.
That's not much, yeah, especially when you compare to these youth leagues. So I feel there's some subsidization going on across community
to keep
sports.
You playing softball. That's what the world needs. That's what the government needs to subsidize is Alex playing softball.
Honestly, I do. I'm like, I feel like, man, I should probably be paying more. This is just an excuse for me to come out and like drink with buddies once a week and like occasionally swing a bat and then injure myself. But it's fair, I'd say, to demand an itemized receipt. Anytime we're dealing with a public service, it always feels like, hey, you get whatever it is that you pay money for, and what you get is very vague. But it's a public service, so You shouldn't be able to ask for more. No, no. I want to know where this money's going. Fair. It's a
Yeah.
fair ask. Okay. That's
Yeah,
it.
I agree. It's and you're when the time comes, you're gonna experience it also. And yeah, it's I'll say it's one of those things where like I think we're gonna switch leagues next year because I know there's leagues out there with goals. I see goals. I see referees. This isn't like it's not like I invented the concept and I'm trying to change the world of soccer. You know what I mean?
By contrast, I was at the YMCA over the winter, and they had one Saturday I was there. They had youth basketball going on.
Sure.
There was one team. There was one team just running it up. And what one thing I will say, when we were growing up, there was not as much gender mixing in even at the lower levels of sports. Like every
Sure.
now and then you'd run across a team that had a girl on it, but there was leagues for girls and there was leagues for boys. And we just didn't have that much crossover. Now it's kind of surprising how much intermixing you have, which at that age, when you're that young and you're first starting out, it's fine. Everyone's just learning the basics, so it makes sense. But these basketball leagues, man, there was one team that was like all boys, and they're probably like 7 or 8 years old, and there was another team that was mixed. And I'm telling you, the all boy team, I literally looked at the scoreboard when I walked in. It was 32-0, and I was like, they haven't turned the scoreboard off yet. Like, let's just show some mercy. And then I started, like, the score was so bad that I was intrigued. I had to watch for a little bit. Because,
Sure.
if you're a parent of one of the kids on the 0 team, you're reevaluating all of your life choices at that point, I'm sure. And I watched, and it was like the ball would barely get over half court before it was stolen, and then the other team turned it into a bucket. It was like one team clearly knew what they were doing, and the other team, it's like they've never seen a basketball before in their life. And it's like at that level, you just have to have some equity so that it's fun. Because like kids on the 0 team are probably, I mean, there might be 1 or 2 that continue on, but they're probably dropping out after this, and it's just like,
Yeah.
it's just a weird place.
The I don't know if it was intentional, but the second game my daughter played the because she's I think what the mistake, she's like kind of fast, and she's the 2 girls on the team are the 2 tallest kids on the team. That's a funny thing is like on paper you look at them both and they're like reasonably athletic and coordinated, and they both are the biggest kids on the team, or at least the tallest kids on the team. Yeah. And then, dude, I mean, they're just like, just no aggression, not an ounce of aggression between either of them. And they both just like, my daughter gets discouraged at any failure. And this is like a thing we've worked on outside of soccer. It's not like soccer is, she thinks she should be a perfectionist at soccer. She's like a perfectionist. It's a whole thing. But, yeah, but this is why we like sports, right? This is why it's valuable to play sports, is she is going to face adversity at these like younger levels and hopefully learn how to deal with failure, because life is full of failures.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that, by the way, because I've been bombing on stage for the last several weeks, just constantly.
Is it because I haven't been doing the show with you? Do you need me?
Yeah.
Help,
in fact, it never went well until I've been doing new material.
Okay, you can run them by me, and I'll be like, "Hey, that's
good." Don't do that joke.
Don't ever tell me that joke again. Yeah.
I've been. I had one good set this weekend. I opened for this dude. I hosted for Giannis Pappas. You ever heard of him?
No, I've heard of Giannis Antetokounmpo, but
different guy, significantly different. Both Greek. Although I think probably genetically different in a couple different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, Giannis Pappas was very funny, but there was like just some kind of duds for my sets. Same material pretty much, like kind of working through new material. And boy, it's very discouraging. You get to a point in comedy where you're like, I think I'm good at this. I think I can write new material. This won't be a problem. And then you're like, oh fuck, maybe I suck. Maybe I've sucked the whole time. Maybe I got lucky on that first hour of material and I just sucked. But I will be running new material every Tuesday from here until like November 19th at Tacoma Comedy Club. I'm hosting The Voice. It's a comedy competition they do. I'm trying to get better at doing the plugs earlier in the show, by the way. Wisconsin. Appleton, Wisconsin.
It's always good to segue into your plugs after telling everybody how bad you've been doing.
Yes, that's right. Appleton, Wisconsin, come see me. I was supposed to be opening for Harlan Williams. I'm opening for a guy named Chris Frangiola. And then Bickerson's Brewhouse, we do it every month. The next show is October 19th. It's in Renton, Washington, and Renton native Monica Nevi is headlining. Monica is probably at this point the best headliner we can get. She is great, and it might be the last year we're able to get her to do that show. So come on out to that because that'll be a treat. And we have some great support acts, and I've committed to doing that show. Sometimes I don't attend those shows because I have other stuff going on, and I just book them out. And this one which is code for my wife is coming to the show, so I have to. Oh yeah, and then this is cousin Mike here. Mike Hansen is featuring actually on the show, so it'll be a good show.
Nice.
And you can call the tap room to get tickets to that, and then we'll keep plugging shit as more stuff comes up. Can we talk about? I want to talk about. So we have a couple topics that I want to talk about, but you and I didn't really get to talk about the Apple Cup, and I don't think we need to go like X's and O's breakdown of the Apple Cup, but I'm curious if you have a similar, philosophy on this, because at a point I remember my dad and my father-in-law separate from each other at different points in their lives, at different points in the history of the two programs, kind of going like, I don't really hate Washington State. In fact, if they're not playing the Huskies, I kind of root for them. And that was never really true for me. But now that they're not a Pac-12 rival, and I do think they got fucked. Like, they got fucked in the Pac-12 collapsing down to two teams. So I have sympathy for the program, but I don't mean like, I really don't mean it like condescending sympathy. Like, I mean, now I'm at a point where I like kind of just.
It doesn't matter how you mean it. They always take it as condescending.
Of course. It's a sensitive fan base.
I'm like, you know what? If you're just going to take it as condescending, then I'm going to be condescending because that's what you want. I'm going to give you what you want. So you have the villain you're looking for, and it'll be me. That's fine. I'm fine with that.
At this point, are you rooting for the Cougars? When the Huskies game's over, do you turn on the Cougars and hope that they win? Like, I was watching the game against San Jose State, and I was like, yeah, I kind of would like them to win this game.
I have a lot of friends who are Cougs.
I know you wore a hat, so I won't go quite that far. But
well, I mean, if you're a Husky fan, you probably have some Cougar friends out there. I mean, most people in the state know people who are, at the very least, are Cougs. I think that's what always, to me, made the rivalry with Oregon more bitter, is because, like, chances are you know a lot more Cougs that you like than you know Ducks who you like.
Sure.
Just the geography and how far apart we are, that sort of thing. I also saw this graphic that, some national guy wrote up the other day about every power team's biggest rival and who they perceive their biggest rival to be. And it was funny because there was a mutual arrow between Oregon and Washington. We both recognize each other as our biggest rivals, but then Washington State's arrow was pointing towards Washington and we were not reciprocating. And Oregon State's rival was pointing towards Oregon and they were not reciprocating. And it is funny because you always look for rivals. And I think part of what makes a rivalry so great is if you agree that you're mutual rivals. And I think as the years have gone by, Washington and Washington State have drifted farther apart. And I think Washington has been the ones who have initiated that more than anything else, frankly, because Washington State just has not kept pace over the years. I mean, when you win 2/3 of the games of a rivalry, at what point does it stop really being a rivalry, And I think that's maybe the biggest part of that more than anything. It's just, it hasn't been super competitive over the years. But as far as rooting for the Cougs, no, I don't. I feel sorry for them.
Oh my God.
I feel
the exact thing I'm trying to avoid. You're like really are leaning into.
To me, the Cougs and the Mariners are very similar, and I know how I feel as a Mariner fan. And where I feel sorry for Cougs is that if they're also Mariner fans, like the Coug fan who is also a Mariner fan, like, I don't know how you do it because I couldn't do it twice. I do it once with the Mariners, and if I had to do it with another team, I would probably jump off a bridge, man. Like, I'd just be like, it'd be way too much for me to deal with. It sucks bad enough with the Mariners. And then not only that, but the seasons segue to one another. So it's like you go straight from a disappointing Mariners season into the disappointing Coug season. And in similar ways, it's like they always get your hopes up. They're always good enough to get your hopes up and then let them down as the year goes on. And that's the worst part about it. So that's where I feel bad for them. But do I root for them? No. I find it funny. The way that they lose. To me, it's just like the comic relief that follows the Mariners season. Like, it affects me. It impacts me emotionally when the Mariners do it. When I watch the Cougs do it, it's funny.
Ben Coug says, yep, Mariners fan here too. Yeah. Do you think so? I mean, we obviously watch through kind of dubious efforts on the Huskies coaching staff's part. We see the Cougars beat the Huskies, and I mean, immediately my first thought was like, when There was a point when Washington playing Gonzaga was a favor to Gonzaga. And then Gonzaga got good, and it started to be a detriment to Washington. And then Washington cut off the rivalry. And now I don't even know if Gonzaga at this point would put Washington on. I mean, maybe they would for an easy victory, frankly. Like the way those two basketball programs have ascended and descended away from each other. Like obviously Gonzaga is the more powerful basketball program at this point. Yeah. And I'm not saying that I think Washington State. I don't mean this from the perspective of like I'm not saying do you project Washington State to become the Gonzaga of college football. Frankly, that's Boise State already. Like that is already there already is a Gonzaga of college football, I could argue, but I mean as far as like I would love to see the Apple Cup stick around forever, but at some point, if it's as competitive as that game was on a weekly basis, like having it be an early season non-conference game for the Huskies is like that probably only can hurt them, right?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's still too early to tell. I mean, I think this year was always
real quickly because my point is that they wouldn't get credit for beating a quality opponent.
Yeah, I mean, this year this year things are still pretty even, right? Even though there's been this realignment, like that from one year to the next, it's not going to be a huge drop off. Where it's going to matter is over time. And obviously for Washington State, if they can save the Pac-12, which it looks like they're in the process of doing, I don't think the Pac-12 is going to be considered. This new iteration of the Pac-12 is not going to be considered a power conference, by all accounts. The teams that they're pulling into this new conference have always been, smaller. So no knock on them, but as time goes by, the money is probably going to be there for schools like Washington via bigger conferences and bigger TV deals, and maybe not there as much for these new Pac-12 teams. And that's when you're going to start to see a shift. Also, I mean, like, I know how much work the Cougar Collective and the NIL money, at Wazoo, I know how much work they do to retain the players that they have. And frankly, for Wazoo, if you can get a kid to campus, they're probably more likely to stay there than they would be on a lot of other school campuses, because just that college environment that you have in Pullman is attractive to a lot of kids once they're there.
Sure.
And I think they do have a benefit, but where they're going to struggle, I think, is just in recruiting high school kids and potentially recruiting transfers as that money starts to shift. So again, not a knock on them. I just think there's going to be a reality over time where this divide becomes bigger and bigger. And then who knows? I mean, this year, of course, they wanted to win this year. They had a lot of reasons to want to win. I mean, Washington State blames Washington for destroying the Pac-12, and that's fine. They're always going to do that. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. It's just the reality of how they perceive things. And so, of course, they're going to be upset and want to win that game more than Washington did. In watching the game itself, Washington has all these transfers, a lot of first-year players, a coaching staff that's not really ingrained here. They just didn't want it as bad. I mean, that was the reality. And you could point to a number of other things, execution of plays, play calling, whatever. The fact is Washington just didn't want that game as bad as Washington State did. And that'll probably be the case every year, but eventually there will probably be a talent gap. And then you're right. I mean, does it become worth it to Washington to play that game if things continue to exist the way they seem to be headed? I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like you need Washington State to stay bad enough to keep that game going, as opposed to like if they're good enough to make it competitive year over year, or if they're not good enough to be in a conference to make the Pac-12 into a conference that's like a power conference, or to eventually join a power conference if there's continued realignment. Well, then it's it's as a fan, I want to see it every year, and I really don't give a shit if the games are competitive. But I understand from Washington's perspective, where there's millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially tied up in going to another college football playoff, having this like landmine on your schedule every year is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see it every year too. I mean, would you rather see, another Eastern Michigan come to town? Probably not.
Right.
It also doesn't sell tickets. So, there's a vested interest for the schools in selling tickets, but at the same time, 5 years down the road, what does this economic divide look like? I mean, that's what you're really dealing with here.
Well, and when is Washington ever going to play in Martin Stadium again?
Yeah, I mean they're shifting this back to the schools. This
Is it
contract
home and
they
home
have.
after the
Yeah,
after the
they're going
okay.
home and home. I think the only reason they weren't able to book their own stadiums this quickly, which I don't know exactly why they did Lumen this year. I can't remember exactly the reasons why, but
But
they
so
are
it's
going
it's
back
only
to the
on
college
the it's only
games.
contracted for 4 more years, right?
Yeah, and I don't think that you're going to find out in that time if this is 4 years. Let's say Washington State stabilizes. Washington probably has some turnover. Like I don't think Jed Fish is going to be here in 4 years. So
Right.
the dynamic of the two teams is probably going to shift enough over that time that you don't really get a good idea of the change and what it all means in the long term. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's enough to keep things going. I mean, I think for Washington State, this year presents a really interesting dynamic because they have a really, really good shot of getting into the 12-team playoff. I think. I mean, their schedule is against inferior opponents. Again, no disrespect to those opponents, but Washington State still has retained much of their Pac-12 talent on their roster this year, and the teams they're playing are Mountain West teams, right? So they should
Right.
go out and be able to beat a lot of those teams. And if they have an undefeated run, it doesn't matter what conference you're in or how big you are. The committee has shown that if you're undefeated, especially with a 12-team expanded playoff, you're getting in. So if Washington State can somehow find their way into that tournament and put together a respectable showing, that gives them a really great opportunity for recruiting for the next few years. Then who knows how long you can kind of keep this going. I mean, you're constantly going to be chasing a little bit because the money inherently is going to be problematic with this lack of TV deal revenue coming in. But if you can create a compelling product on the field, then kids are going to want to go there. And then it's just up to your donors and your boosters to figure out a way to make sure you can retain those kids. So, for Washington, I think the next 4 or 5 years are going to be pretty tumultuous because I don't think Fish and staff have a desire to be here. You've already lost one Apple Cup, which is everybody knows that's like the big thing. Like now there's a ton of pressure on these guys when they face Oregon later in the year. If you don't beat Oregon, now all of a sudden you're going to have or not teams, but you're going to have fans and boosters clamoring for a change, whether it's fair or unfair, even if it's only your first year. I mean, those are the games you have to win when you are a new regime, and they've already lost one of them. Now they have to go beat Oregon later in the year, and you just don't know what you're going to get with Washington for the next few seasons.
Ben Coog says, I would rather see the series end after this contract. We'll be on drastically different levels financially once UW hits full Big Ten money shares, $70 million versus $15 million. By the way, I mean, this is like you and I are both Huskies fans, but I'd be really interested to hear from other Cougars fans on what they think of that, because I'm like, if that's how the Cougars feel, if that's how their fan base feels, to me, I guess I'd feel a little better getting rid of it. But I also think like that game probably is going to be one of their like a revenue generator for them in the future also. So that $15 million maybe gets subsidized a little bit by playing this Washington, the Apple Cup every year.
Well, I mean, I think as this gap widens, you're going to see this new Pac-12 and the teams in the new Pac-12 be on the short end of buy games. They're going to be the teams that get bought to go play an SEC team early in the year or a Big Ten team early in the year. And it's great to have that money on those buy games, but wouldn't you rather host the game? And like, that's where it's like financially beneficial for them to host a rival. I mean, I think about like, for years, Colorado State kept their rivalry up, even as their gap was distant. Colorado State was Mountain West and Colorado was Big 12 and then Pac-12. And it's like, you can still make it viable. And those games still mattered for Colorado and Colorado State every year. It's not like they were so far apart that they couldn't compete from year to year. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think a year ago or so when this realignment started shifting, a lot of people thought, oh, there's a chance we'll go back. There's a chance we'll go back to geographic alignment and more traditional conferences. But, credit to Washington State and Oregon State for really kind of saving the Pac-12. The problem with saving the Pac-12 now is that I don't think we're going to go back. If you have 10 or 12 teams of any caliber in this new Pac-12 conference, you've established something. You've established something that's big enough to exist on its own, even if it's not recognized as a power conference. And then because of that, there's no room for teams to come back. And so this is the reality we live with now, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a version of college football some decades from now where there's 96 teams in 4 conferences with a 12 or 16 team playoff, something like that. And I don't know what the time frame is because there's a million contracts and media deals and shit like that that are in the way of this happening. But I do think I'd like to see Washington State become part of that. And in that way, like maybe when you and I are very old men, we see Washington and Washington State in the same conference again at some point, and the rivalry gets renewed and the money is closer. But I think we're a long ways away from that. I mean, decades potentially away from that. And yeah, it sucks. I have sympathy without trying to be condescending, but it's a sensitive fan base, so take it however you will. Alex doesn't give a shit. He's shitting all over your grave.
Sorry,
and you beat our favorite team also. So who are we?
Yeah, you won this year. And you know what? Here's the one thing that bugged me with their win. As soon as they got the trophy, Jake Dickert starts talking about, oh, maybe we should retire this trophy now or change it or maybe just never give it back as we have. And it's like, now you're acting like the jealous ex-girlfriend that's like, I'm keeping your hoodie, after the breakup. Like, okay, buddy, we get it. You guys won, and that's great. That's great that you won. You deserve the win. You deserved it more, and you deserve to have that victory. But you don't have to go changing everything now and acting like the scorn lover. Just take the high road. Take your victory.
If you would have stayed loyal,
or
Alex,
don't. You don't do that. Do whatever you want. It's not up to me. I'm just saying that's how it's being perceived that you're acting, and that's fine.
So the Huskies played another game in between now and then in the what will become a more and more confusing the Northwestern Wildcats. Which will be confusing as time goes on, and both teams wear purple. It's like we didn't talk about it on the podcast, but the Washington Commanders are now playing in Northwest Bank Stadium, which that hurts the confusion of Washington, D.C. and Washington State. And now we have the Northwest Wildcats wearing purple. Anyways, the Washington beats. I guess that's just like this. I'm still struggling with the Big Ten stuff.
It's a pretty inauspicious. Well, it's not a very great start to the Big Ten conference because Northwestern is. I mean, they're the Stanford replacement. They can barely field a team. They're terrible at football. They're not exactly getting you psyched about the Big Ten. Sure.
So Washington is 3-1. They've played, I hate to say nobody because the fucking Ben Coog is here saying, hey, he wore the hat. I'm good with Alex. I don't want to, but they're playing nobody that they would get credit for a tough loss if you were thinking Washington could make the playoff, you'd expect them to be 4-0 here. And I think that you would have hoped as a Washington fan they'd be 4-0. And going into Rutgers, you'd have a little more confidence. And they've kind of every one of these games, the game against Weber State, the offense starts slow. The game against Eastern Michigan, the offense starts slow. They have huge lulls in the Washington State game. And then I was watching the Northwestern game kind of in the green room, like half at home, half in the green room between sets and shit. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but it felt like the offense was not really clicking at a lot of points in that game. Also, the defenses look good against opponents who you would expect the defense to look good against. You obviously want to see the Huskies clean up the penalties. There's been costly penalties, but Steve Belichick at this point, I don't think you can give anyone F to A grades. I think we're still in just pass or fail because of the quality of opponents. He's getting a pass, and I think Jed Fish, you're bordering, right? To me, you're bordering on, is he a failure so far?
I don't think
as an offensive play caller.
I get what you're saying. I mean, Northwestern's pretty bad. They were pretty awful to watch. I mean, these guys, you can go back and look at all the various numbers that they put up in this game, but it was like playing another non-conference preseason opponent. I've seen better, Eastern Washington would be a better opponent, I think, than Northwestern. But they are, in your conference, and it's nice to get a conference win. I think for Washington coming up, the bigger test will be going on the road to Rutgers. I know Rutgers is not traditionally a great football program, but when you're going all the way across the country and having to play a team you've really never seen before, that's a test. And then obviously coming back at home, they'll have Michigan, and that's the real deal. So yeah, I would agree with you. I think the defense has been better than expected. We know that they had some returners on defense where they really didn't have too many returners at all. But they did have some returners on defense, and those returners have been difference makers so far. And I think that's kind of held that entire unit together. On offense, I mean, they just had so much turnover. Like, frankly, I wasn't expecting a whole lot from them, and they've pretty much met my expectations. I know. I think we take for granted how good the offense was the last couple of years. I think about that with the fourth down play in the Apple Cup, where they run probably one of the worst play calls ever, the short side speed option, and it fails miserably. You know, last 2 years with Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer, Michael Penix, all the receivers they had, they were automatic on fourth down, and they were creative. Ryan Grubb is a creative play caller, especially in, balls to the wall situations like fourth down. And he always found a way to pull out an amazing play and execute it. He had the guys to execute it. Now you're going back more vanilla. I mean, you got to remember Jed Fish, one of the guys he worked for was Pete Carroll, and we know what Pete Carroll's offenses, not that they were his personal offenses because he was a defensive guy, but we just know how vanilla those things can look. And then, he also studied under Bill Belichick. So, another guy who's pretty vanilla when it comes to offenses. So just in general, they're pretty much where I would expect them to be. I think Will Rogers is a better quarterback than maybe I thought he'd be. Some of the throws he makes are pretty impressive. I mean, there was a touchdown pass he had on Saturday that was a no joke deep ball, and you're like, okay, I didn't know he had that. A lot of the scouting report on Rogers was he's good on the short routes, he's good on the short passes, and he's more or less a game manager. So to see him air it out and see some positive signs from this team where there haven't been a lot so far is good. But now they really kind of get into the real tests coming up here.
Yeah. Okay, so Rutgers, I have I'm digging back through past schedules. They played Rutgers week 1, I think 2016. Jake Browning at quarterback, I think Chris Peterson head coach. So this is not experience that this staff or this the players on this team can draw from. I'm back to 2012. I suspect if I went to 2003, which is as I'm just scrolling back through ESPN, I bet you Washington hasn't played in the Eastern time zone this late in the season since 2000, probably. I mean, this is a different. This is really the first week where you're like, this is a different thing now. What Washington's going to deal with is a different thing now.
I remember them playing Syracuse in in Locker's first start. So off the top of my head, that's the last time I remember them playing in the Eastern time zone. And that was your opening game of the season. So you obviously have a lot of time to prep for it, stuff like that.
So that was September 11th, or maybe unless they had a home. No, I guess that was maybe it was the year before or the 2 years before the.
It was 2009-ish, maybe. I want to say 2009, 2010.
They played them in 2010, but it wasn't. They played at BYU and then Syracuse at home.
Oh, okay.
That year.
Yeah. I distinctly remember Carrier Dome, so I'm pretty sure they played somewhere. But regardless, yeah, you're right. They don't play in the Eastern time zone very often. It's going to be a real test. I mean, these are college kids who are traveling across the country. It throws your timing off. You still have the added element of having to worry about getting your schoolwork done. There's a reality to college sports with all this realignment that it's going to be a big change, and probably more of a challenge on the personnel to make sure that they execute everything and get these kids ready for games than anything else. So yeah, I'm interested to see how it goes. I'm interested to see what they look like when they go out to Rutgers. And again, just, a nice, easy test for them before they really have to take on some big teams like Michigan. So yeah, we'll see what's up, and curious to see where we go from here. You disappeared for a little bit on me. Where'd you go? You're still gone, apparently. Okay. No one can hear you. That's cool. Do you have your mute button on? This is like doing a Zoom meeting right now with Casey. It's just this is the guy who's in charge of the production. And here we are just fumbling around. Maybe you can work this into your comedy somehow. And then maybe no one can hear you still. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Huskies, if that's okay. So yeah, I mean, for me,
Now?
yeah, I can hear you now. What happened there? What were you doing?
All right, good. Yeah, I realized that my laptop power wasn't plugged in, and I was gonna die pretty soon. And then I did something, and it shut off the extra monitor, the mic, the fucking camera. Everything went to shit all at once. So
That's okay. It
did he
happens.
coog it? Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
he
Ben
definitely
Coog, I
he
did
cooked the
coog it.
production. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
that's right.
we can probably move on to the Seahawks. I don't know. What do
Yeah,
you
it's
think?
fine.
Do you have anything
Yeah,
else
I'm
on the
fine with that.
Huskies you'd like to
I
share?
mean, I don't want to make like the constant comparison between the Seahawks and the Huskies, but it kind of feels like the same boat where you're like, and you're not going to find someone who this offseason, I might have been the biggest Ryan Grubb advocate. I wanted him to take the head coaching job at Washington. He didn't get offered it. It's not like he turned it down. I was thrilled when he got hired to be the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, and I'm not unhappy with him, but I'm like, Mike McDonald's defense has looked very good against weak competition. And Ryan Grubb, it seems like, has not coached a good full game yet. There's been like one half of each game has been good, and then the other half has been like a disaster to this point. They're 3-0. So, like, Mike McDonald against bad competition. You're like Jacoby Brissett, Bo Nix's debut, and Skylar Thompson. These aren't world beaters.
Yeah.
So he gets a pass because you have to beat those guys because like you got to check the box. You have to beat those guys. But the offense has looked a little weak at points. Disappointing to me. There's been points where they've looked masterful also, right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because at the beginning of the year, looking at the Seahawks schedule, you knew they had one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. They're doing what they're supposed to against that easy schedule. I mean, if you look ahead, they have a little bit of a test coming up in their next game. They get the Lions, and Jared Goff is, last couple of years been a pretty good quarterback. He hasn't really done a whole lot this season. And now Sam Laporte is banged up, and we know tight ends historically tend to be a weak spot for the Seahawks. So if they don't have their tight end and quarterback's only playing okay-ish, that'll be an interesting test to see if they can go win on the road. And then they get the Giants. We know the Giants are bad. They get the Niners, and obviously the Niners are always going to be tough. And then they go right back to kind of a cush schedule with the Falcons again. It's like every time you turn around, it's like they might have one tough game, but then they come back and they get an easy one after that, which is really nice. They're in prime position to actually have a playoff campaign in McDonald's first year, which is great. All you can do is play the teams in front of you. And, I think the Dolphins originally would have been a pretty big test, but not having Tua due to injury really helps the Seahawks out because, again, they did exactly what they're supposed to do. They handled a backup quarterback that's just not very good. It's shocking to me. This is kind of off topic, but it's shocking to me that knowing Tua's injury history, the Dolphins have just never invested in a backup quarterback. They're still running Skylar Thompson out there. Skylar Thompson was the backup a few years ago when Tua got hurt, and when he was shit then. Like, what are you even doing? Like, why wouldn't you go get one of the best backup QBs on the market? Maybe they're just paying too many other guys too much money or something, but very strange.
I talked to Josh Hermsmeyer about this a little bit. Like, first off, every team should be investing in backup quarterbacks because they get hurt all the time. I agree with what you're saying about, like, they did what they had to do, but you can't feel like, I think we're trying to read between the lines a little bit. And this kind of reminds me of, remember many years ago, Jose Mesa had like a 4.5 ERA, but like he hadn't blown a save the whole year. And that was like a big thing. But it was like, we all knew this was a house of cards, that like a light wind was going to knock this over. And that is like the Patriots game in particular, though, again, it's like you go to Foxborough and beat a Patriots team that, granted, is not bad, but and Jacoby Brissett is not a great quarterback, but he isn't a rookie. He's a veteran quarterback who has won games in the NFL before, who's spent a fair amount of time starting games in the NFL. He's like been a part-time starter or full-time starter at points in his career multiple times. It's but there's like nothing feels good is what I would say. And it's
Oh,
not just
I
like
disagree. I disagree.
you're happy to check the let me rephrase that. Overall, they don't feel they're like the pass rush feels great. The secondary play feels great. The defense period seems good. But again, how much of that is the incompetence of the opposing offenses as opposed to eliteness from your own defense? Also, I just want to acknowledge this. I don't know if Daegu Dave, if it's the penalties. This is, I assume, related to the Huskies. It could be related to the Seahawks have had some really stupid penalties also. Devin Witherspoon, the guy we've been talking about and thinking about all offseason and how he would just flourish in Mike McDonald's defense, has 2 weeks in a row with like very stupid penalties.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think there's, the NFL now, with the way that their preseason schedule works, the fact that starters typically don't play in the preseason, you kind of start treating your first 2 or 3 games almost as a tune-up. And so, we talked about this before the season started. Like, for Mike McDonald, the most important thing was winning early and winning out of the gate, because that would calm any speculation down about what type of coach he is and what this team is all about. He's done that now. He's won 3 straight, which, it helps beyond just winning the 3 games. It helps that the rest of the teams in this division have not looked all that great. The fact that the 49ers are 1-2 is like a miracle. Like, what is going on? Yeah. So it's, for the Seahawks, now they're playing with house money a little bit. I think, you're right. The defense is playing pretty good. And we knew that would be their calling card. I mean, they returned a lot of talent on defense. They obviously have a defensive-minded head coach now who comes from a pretty good defensive background in Baltimore. And they're doing what they're supposed to do. You don't see too many defenses, no matter who they're playing against, hold teams to 3 points. It just doesn't happen very often in the NFL, even if you're playing one of the worst quarterbacks. So to do that is an accomplishment in and of itself. The other thing I would say when it comes to the offense, with as good of a defense as I think this team might have, all you really need to win games is a true game manager quarterback, the Trent Dilfer prototype from back in the day. And what the Seahawks have with Geno Smith is much better than that. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about it in the past, so we don't need to kind of get into the details of the value of Geno Smith. But he's better than anyone ever gives him credit for. The throws he makes are better than what you would expect. All the numbers back up that he's a better quarterback than anyone perceives him to be. And then when he goes like he did in New England and goes and wins the game, puts the team on his back, there's just not a ton of quarterbacks that you can say are capable of doing that or that you trust to do that in those situations. And I think Geno's moving himself into that category where he becomes more than just a game manager and really a winner. So, to me, they look like a pretty complete team. And I'm sure there's going to be people that say, well, you could poke a hole here, 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 and here. But for the NFL and the point of the season where we're at right now, regardless of who they've played, they've been pretty solid in all facets of the game. And that's really all you want to see 3 games in. You want to see a winning record and you want to see solid across the board. And that's really what they've been. And then from here, you can actually build off that a little bit more. We know momentum in the NFL is a huge factor. Being able to have that momentum and going into some tougher matchups, a Monday Night Football game, and then 2 games down the road after that, the 49ers, that's going to be important because now you feel like you at least have something in your back pocket. You're not chasing wins at this point. Anything you get just kind of adds to that total and hopefully extends that division lead.
Yeah. Okay. Don't have a lot more than an hour today, so I want to talk about the Mariners just really briefly before we play the home run game, and then in 25 days when you make your return to the podcast, we can dig because the Mariners situation just feels inevitable. I think they're going to miss the playoffs. They have I think they're back up to 7% playoff odds, or actually they're down to 7% playoff odds. They had gotten back up to 10%. It feels like they're going to have a very Mariners ownership friendly season, which is they don't spend any more money in the offseason, and they are in playoff contention up until the final week of the season. What a dream for that ownership group. I don't know, like the Twins have done everything the Mariners needed them to do to give up the wild card, And the Tigers have also not been great. And now the Twins are behind the Royals and the Tigers, and the Mariners are behind the Twins, the Royals, and the Tigers. The odds are bad, but whatever. We're gonna know by the time you come on the podcast next, probably, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I don't want to spend a bunch of time because it's just either is going to be or is not going to be. I will say you put up a tweet today that I was originally going to put just talking about Julio's late season surge. You said I want to interpret your tweet for people who are under 30 because you said it was Julio Rodriguez is like Ricky Davis putting up points for the Cavaliers in whatever year you said.
Oh, it was some tweets are strikeouts, and that one people did not receive that one.
Well, I liked it
fine.
because I was a guy who appreciated the Ricky Davis run. He had a very in Seattle, a guy who is comparable. If you remember when Ray Allen got hurt, Flip Murray went on a run of scoring like 24 points on 28 shots a night and playing the worst defense I've ever seen an NBA player play. And that was like a fun run to watch because he just fucking chucked it up, and he played defense like my kid's soccer team. Like it was fucking terrible, man.
Yeah, Julio wins the AL Player of the Week at a time when I guess you could say they need it most, but it would have been nice like 2 months ago, right? Like anytime you win Player of the Week or any sort of award, it's an accomplishment. Let's not take away from what it is, but to me it just reminded me of like a garbage time NBA scorer, right? Ricky Davis to me embodies the garbage time NBA scorer, just a guy who pads those stats when it really doesn't matter, the game's out of hand. And that's kind of where it feels like the Mariners are right now. It's like, yeah, they're finally clicking, they're finally running on all cylinders, and it doesn't even fucking matter because they have put themselves in a position where they do not control their own destiny. So even if they win every game from now until the end of the year, they could still miss the playoffs. And frankly, it would be very Mariner of them to do exactly that. Just win every game and still miss the playoffs. Because here's the thing, the teams they're chasing, you're right. The Twins, the Tigers, the Royals, Twins and Royals, the Royals especially, have been in like epic free fall. They have opened a door to the wild card that a month ago was completely shut. The Mariners, it was originally perceived that their only path to the playoffs was through the division because the wild card was so out of reach. And then all of these AL Central teams just decided to shit the bed against one another. So now here we are. I mean, they even let the Tigers back in, and the Tigers at midseason were like considered a bad team.
Well, right? The Tigers, I mean, Mitch Haniger famously said or insinuated that the Mariners were a better team than the Tigers, and the Tigers are probably going to make the playoffs. I think they have a better than 50% chance of making the playoffs.
They control their own destiny, and their last series of the season is against the White Sox, who we know are historically bad. So
amazing.
All these Central teams that the Mariners are chasing get to play each other, which is problematic. While the Mariners go take on the Astros in Houston, which we know is never good for them, and then they finish at home against the A's, which seems like should be forgiving, but the A's have really been hitting the shit out of the ball for the past month or so, and that's
you kind of hope the Astros just beat the Mariners game one of the series and then rest everybody.
The Mariners.
I think they're like the elimination number is 2, which means
magic number is 2.
An Astros win against the Mariners. So if they could go 1-5, 5-1 the rest of the season, but let's front load the loss so that the Astros don't try, hopefully, because I don't even think there's a seeding thing that they care about. And then I mean, the reality is it's very unlikely. It's literally 93% chance they don't make the playoffs according to Fangraphs. That does take into account strength of schedule stuff, but it's probably not taking into account whatever you think the momentum shift for the A's is. But Julio is like snuck his way up to almost a 4-win season, partially abbreviated by injury. I think if we were to look at his offensive numbers in the second half, we're looking at like something closer to 2023 Julio at the worst, maybe somewhere between 2023 and 2022 Julio. And what does that give you? I guess, like, does that make you? So the big thing you were worried about that I agree with, maybe you and I were worried about when they extended Victor Robles, is that they would not view Victor Robles as a fourth outfielder. They would view him as a starter that they got for backup money, right? And he's continued to hit. In fact, I think he's gotten better since you and I talked about that. And then Julio Rodriguez has probably alleviated concerns any concern that he may need someone to spell him in 2025 in center field. Is it good or bad for the Mariners at this point if Julio rips off a big,
Yeah. But I mean, I think the trend is well established at this point. Julio starts slow and he finishes strong, which is good if the rest of your team can kind of carry him through those down months early in the season. They have not proven to be able to do that, and that's a problem, which sucks. It sucks for Julio because you would think if these games really mattered, I mean, they still kind of matter, but if they really mattered down the stretch, then you would be getting your best player hot at the time when you need him to be at his best, right? Like that would be an amazing trend. The problem is Julio starts so miserably slow. It's not like he's treading water as an average player through the first couple months. Like he's actually at times a liability, which is problematic because it really kind of speaks to how much he picks it up in the second half of the year, that he puts together good seasons in spite of how badly he starts. So now they got, for the Mariners, it's almost like, okay, yeah, you're right. They're probably going to miss the playoffs. They're doing the same thing they do every September where they basically find themselves completely outside the playoff picture at the start of the month and then somehow scrape and crawl their way back into it and try to get your interest back by the end of the month. But assuming they do miss the playoffs, I mean, their focus needs to be on how do we get Julio going early next year so that we're not waiting until September for him to actually be performing at his best. Like, what does it take? I know a lot of fans are saying, oh, Edgar Martinez helped fix Julio, and maybe that's all it is. Maybe that's truly what it is. But something has to change next year. I know fans also say, like, the audience, or I guess the offense is being credited to Edgar Martinez and the changes he made, the simplification of his philosophy. And that might be true. I don't think you're getting Edgar Martinez back next year. I feel like him coming on board with Dan Wilson, the last 2 months of this season, were as a favor to an ex-teammate and not necessarily something he wants to engage in full-time next season. So you're going to have to make some moves here in the offseason that help kind of continue this trend you've seen with Edgar, and then also build upon whatever this is in September that they seem to do every year. Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I don't think they have a lot of money. I think they're going to try and run this back with the same guys that they have now. And so you're really just asking these guys to perform better than they did this year.
I'm going to give you, before we play the home run game, so prepare for the home run game, but I'm going to give you some Julio stats, first half, second half. First half, 5.7% walk rate, 27.4% strikeout rate, 104 WRC plus, but that's like, he had a decent May, a 104 WRC plus May that really helped him, and a pretty strong July. And then just disastrous March, April, and June. And then, so he was a 104 WRC plus first half, 139 WRC plus second half. So I was actually basically exactly right. He was right in between 2023 and 2022 Julio. And I could see those things being attributed to Edgar. Like those, if he just started hitting balls and having better luck, I'd be a lot less excited about it than if, like, the strikeout rate's down, the walk rate's up, the power's up. Everything that you really care about is improving. Everything that is projectable into 2025 is improving. Just how do we, like you said, how do you make it start in April instead of August,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about great players. You want them to be consistent. Like if you get all of your stats in a, one giant streak in a month, I mean, it's nice for that month, certainly,
Sure.
but like the best players are the ones that can carry it through an entire season. And that's just what we haven't seen yet from Julio. And that's, I mean, it's a lot on his shoulders because they just don't get him a lot of help in that lineup, but he's got to find a way. I mean, he is what they've invested in. He is the franchise at this point. And now we're getting to a point as he gets older and kind of starts to enter his prime where he's going to have to deliver on it, fair or unfair, regardless of what they have around him. So we'll see what comes next.
This is crazy. If this is true, this is great. I didn't realize this. One more thing. This is from Daegu Dave. I'm like scared to pronounce that wrong and offend all of Italians across the country. One more thing. If the Mariners were to win all 6 games, it would be their longest winning streak this season by 2 games. That's wild that their longest winning streak has been 4 games, but it makes sense. You can't get through one time through this not actually that historic rotation without
Well, I mean, they never had the streak this year that they typically had the last 2 years that really put them in a good position. We know they got up by 10 games in the division in June, and then they really just kind of like sat back and didn't do a whole lot from that point forward. It's like they took it for granted instead of really advancing their lead and trying to keep their foot on the gas. And that sucks, because what they did the last 2 years with those giant winning streaks that kept things going, that's not scalable. You can't expect those level of winning streaks every year. And, it makes sense that they wouldn't do it this year. And yeah, I don't, it's like, even if they happen to sneak in and make the playoffs at this point, nobody cares. That's just like, there's just no energy for it whatsoever.
All right. You have a home run game guy ready, or you want me to go first?
Oh, I've got a guy ready for you.
All right. Hit me with it.
It's another recent retiree, my favorite type of player to give you.
Sure.
I won't say anything else. You know who this guy is. It's Yoenis Cespedes.
Yoenis Cespedes. I was talking to somebody. Who was I talking to about Yoenis Cespedes? Oh, Reese Green was on. My buddy Reese Green was on the podcast recently, and we were talking about Yoenis Cespedes. His ranch is in the town that Reese Green played high school baseball in, I believe. So what a weird. Yoenis Cespedes. So probably shorter career than you would think, because he came in at I want to say 26 or 27 years old, and probably doesn't make it. Is he that? I think he was older because he was, maybe not though, because he's Cuban. So he's got it. The defecting thing always fucks you. I'm going to say he came up at 25, and then his career ends at 33. He's got some injuries in there and some strikeout issues. I'm going to say the 162 game average, I'm going to go 33 home runs. And then I think I gave him 8 years. I'm going to say 235 home runs.
Okay. Wow. You got a lot of things right there. You followed the process. You showed your work, but the answer was not correct. It's one of those situations. You're right. His first year, 2012, he's age 26. That's a Cuban 26, so he could have been 28, 29, 30.
How dare you? How dare you?
He was 26 years old in 2012 when he comes up with the A's. You said he played 8 years. That's the number. His last season, however, was 2020. He only played 8 games. But still, 8 years nonetheless, which is impressive. You said
how many home runs did I say?
You said did you say 235 or 220?
Oh my God. That doesn't even follow that means I said 162 game average is this, and then I gave him 180 games a year.
You did something.
I'm sticking with it. I fucked up, but I'm sticking with it.
But you did say his 162 game average was, I think you said 33.
Yeah.
And it was 32. So I was like,
Pretty good.
and then you mentioned the injuries, which we always know was a thing with Cespedes. He was never healthy, except in 2014, he played 152 games, and in 2015, he played 159 games. So there was a couple seasons there where he showed up, but the second half of his career was just, he was not even reaching triple digits most of the time.
Am I going to miss this by 100?
You're not going to miss it by 100. It was a low variance one. I thought you were about to stick it, however. The number that he has total in his 8-year career, 165 home runs.
That feels disappointing. Now that I know the hasty, sloppy mistake I made of not really thinking through. I did exactly what you said. I went through the process, got close, and then at the end went, fuck it. Let's just
pull a different number.
Yeah, let's
I've done
all
that before too. I've done that. It's fine.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, it was I thought for a second there you were gonna stick it right on, because he is a pretty predictable guy. You kind of know what he did. It's just you had to account for the injuries. So there we are.
Yeah, and then I did, and then I didn't. In the same sentence, pretty much. Okay. Mine for you is to a degree in honor of a guy we have not talked about today that we should have talked about, because Shohei Ohtani became the first 50-50 player ever, had arguably the best offensive day in the history of baseball, when he was 6 for 6 with I think 17 total bases, 3 home runs, and 2 stolen bases, which this makes sense intuitively, but it does sound crazy. I think I saw that he was the first player ever to have 3 home runs and 2 stolen bases in a game, which makes sense because if you hit 3 home runs, what do you have, 1 or 2 additional plate appearances to get on base and steal bases? But a little surprising that we're this many years into baseball and that's never happened before. So this guy, I think, well, I'm not, you know what? Not a recent retiree, but a former Mariner, Ricky Henderson.
I feel like we did Ricky Henderson at some point.
Well,
sure
you feel like that all the time. We
got to
start.
the number. I don't remember the number. So
all right,
we can do it again.
If we ever find a double up when I'm going through them, because I still someday, because we're almost done with the home run game for the year.
We are.
And so when my pledge is when we start it next year, we will have the full up to date, and then we'll see. I probably won't keep up with it because I suck, but yeah. Anyway, if I find a double, we're gonna relitigate that at that time to finish off that season's final score. Is what I'm saying.
It's really more of a question of how badly can you miss the same person twice.
Yes.
Ricky's tough because he had such a long career. I mean, he played for the Mariners in 2000, which was towards the end. And
Boy,
I think
now that you say that exact phrase, I do feel like I've heard that before.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about Ricky in various aspects of baseball. But I think his first year was like 81 or 82. So, I mean, he had like a 20-year career basically, which now you're talking pretty high variance on what the number could be. He's also not a power hitter, but he is a leadoff hitter that we know hit a lot of leadoff home runs and obviously got more ABs than everybody else in the lineup because of that. I don't think, I mean, he's clearly not a power hitter, but he had power and could deploy it at times. And in his best years, he was like an MVP candidate because he was such a dual threat. So how many did he average every year? Probably like 15 home runs a year over the course of 20 years. That's a really long time. If he was hitting 10 a year for 20 years, which I know we'd have to account for the back end and the front end where he's probably not playing as much. But if he was getting 10 a year for 20 years, that's 200 home runs. And if it's 15 a year for that amount of time, that's 300 home runs. So now I'm looking at like 150 home run gap here that I'm working with. This is a good one, and I've probably missed badly at some point in the past, or maybe you missed badly at some point in the past.
That's possible also.
And that's why you're trying to get revenge on me, which is fine. I'm going to say Ricky Henderson had 315 home runs.
All right. So I'm gonna go
just
through
give me
a couple
how bad is it? How bad is it?
I can't tell you. I got to make you fucking hurt. I got to give you the pain and the agony of going through it because there were some things that at points I thought you might stick it. And then you said stuff like he wasn't a power hitter. I'm going to tell you, first off, he comes up in 1979. And it's not one of these comes up and has 15 plate appearances in 1979. He has 398 plate appearances in 1979 and then 722 plate appearances the following year. So he's like full-time player from the time he comes up and 25-year career. Plays until he is 44 years old. He ends his career with the Los Angeles Dodgers in 2003. Nearly made it to my graduation year. Probably made it past your graduation year. You got to watch Ricky Henderson as a college student, I imagine. Are you 03 or 02? 03. Okay, so yeah, you probably were in college watching the very tail end of Ricky Henderson's career. He has 2 seasons with 28 home runs, a season with 24 home runs, a season with 21 home runs.
This is bad.
You said he's not a power hitter, and I understand why you have that perception, but that's why he's so interesting. Is he had some years with like really a lot of home runs. He wins the MVP in 1990 and gets votes in like another half dozen years or something like that. He's a guy who at 32 years old. Tell me if you find this as surprising as I do. The last All-Star game, Ricky Henderson, he played till he's 44. His last All-Star game was at 32 years old. That seems surprising to me. Even just like a nod as the one guy on some of those, like, I mean, I guess those were good Oakland teams, but then he's on like a Toronto team and a Padres team and an Angels team and a Mets team. Like, can you give Ricky the nod? But so he plays 25 seasons. His 162 game average, 16 home runs. You were between 10 and 15, I think.
Yeah.
297 home runs. You did pretty damn good, Alex. It was
Okay,
pretty.
all right.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I at
Not
points
bad.
you had to be thinking he was going to get to 400 the way I was talking about it.
Yeah, I was worried about when you said 25-year career, I said, oh, that's got to help. That actually probably helps my number because I went high end. I went 15. I basically averaged out 15 a year, and that's about what he was. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Ricky was one of those guys that, to have a 12-year break from the All-Star game at the end of his career, it's weird. The thing is, like, that was when you and I were becoming very cognizant to baseball. And I never perceived Ricky Henderson as like an elite player. I think his elite years were when we were probably too young to like recognize what he was doing, when he was mostly in Oakland and New York. And then when he starts bouncing around to these other teams, it's like, he's there, he's a good player, but he's not a guy that you think of as one of the greats in that area.
I think the only reason that I would say I kind of agree with you is he played a corner outfield spot and wasn't a huge power hitter in those years. He played some center field early in his career, but he mostly played left field. But I always thought of him as the best leadoff hitter in baseball. And he was a guy that, by the way, this is a guy who he has a career 401 on base percentage. An underrated part of his game is that he walked a shitload. Led the league in walks 4 times in his career, including 1998 as a 39-year-old playing for the Oakland Athletics.
Yeah, he was
crazy.
He was what every team was looking for in their leadoff hitter, and no one was ever finding. I mean, and speed was so underappreciated in the 90s. I mean, every team had a speedy leadoff hitter that was like, it's not like it is now where you just
I think speed was actually overvalued. I think they thought that you could just get a speedy guy and make him your leadoff hitter and on base percentage and contact be damned.
I would say by teams, you're probably right. It was probably overvalued by teams and underappreciated by fans who were obsessed with home runs during that era. But I mean, every team wanted a Ricky, and he was one of one. I mean, I think of like another guy who I think of as like the prototypical leadoff hitter from that era is like a Kenny Lofton. And that guy didn't hit home runs. He just got on base and stole bases.
I know we've talked about Kenny Lofton. Kenny Lofton is like if I ever had enough, if anyone cared about my opinion enough, Kenny Lofton had a Major League Baseball career that was on par with Ichiro. He didn't get enough votes in his first year on the ballot to make it to the second ballot. Yeah. And Ichiro was essentially a unanimous first ballot Hall of Famer. And that's like, to me, one of the greatest travesties. I'm sure Lofton will get in on the veterans committee years, but it's fucking ridiculous that Lofton is not in the Hall of Fame and that Ichiro went in first ballot with no fight.
That's what I'm saying. Speed was underappreciated in the 90s.
Yeah,
they weren't voting Ricky into All-Star games.
These are writers, not fans, though. These guys stink. Fuck them. All right. Well, we got to go. Thank you guys for listening. Casey McLean comedy everywhere but X, where I am. What am I? The Casey McLean there. And watch my special, Do Not Shake, on YouTube. We're up to almost, it's at 37,000 views, which is pretty exciting.
Or you can go see you live in person.
If you live in Appleton, Wisconsin, or if you want to come to Tacoma, Washington, any Tuesday. I think they're free shows, by the way. Come. It's like a contest. So it's a bunch of comedians vying to become club regulars. And I'm just there really spitting in their face of this effort they're putting in because I'm going to be bombing new material on a weekly basis.
Perfect. Yes. Great sell.
But I also do good material and to soften the blow. All right. Bye, everybody.